we spotted for the first time the 3 carriers of the 4 that were known to be in the area.
On the way back from Midway Island, in the air, they told all the pilots there was a group of American planes heading to attack the ship. But until then, I had no idea that the Americans would ever appear.
American torpedo planes arrive and attack 3 of the Japanese carriers. Unfortunately, due to the limitations of the torpedo plane design, the Japanese are able to knock them out of the air. The carrier crews listen to their fellow servicemen on the ship radio.
Mayday, mayday. I'm ditching.
They got Sherman. Bail out.
2 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Watch it.
We could see our torpedo planes going in the water, one right after the other, after the other. They were obviously under heavy attack from the Japanese aircraft.
Of the 15 planes from Hornet, all are shot down. Of the Yorktown's 12 torpedo planes, 10 are lost. Of 14 planes from the Enterprise, only 4 survive. Meanwhile, the Japanese quickly prepare their counterattack. But dive bombers from the Enterprise and Hornet make their attack. They approach their target unopposed, since the Japanese fighters have not had time to regain altitude from the torpedo attack. Akagi is hit, and its bombs and ammunition explode. Bombs hit the Kaga, knocking out the bridge and penetrate the hangar. A 3rd Japanese carrier, Soryu, is left a blazing inferno.
We came in over the top at 17,000 feet, and within minutes after we initiated the attack on the Soryu, she was a gunner. She was changing the armament. Their decks were loaded with the bombs that they had dropped for shore-base use. That was their mistake.
Now, only one carrier, Hiryu, is left. Its commander, Rear Admiral Yamaguchi, immediately orders a strike against the American carriers.
I felt it was a great loss. The only remaining ship was Hiryu, so I felt we were the ones who had to take revenge for the 3 destroyed ships.
Zeros and dive bombers from the Hiryu follow the returning American planes to the Yorktown. Tension mounts as American sailors await the next wave. Then they see the enemy planes. Taisuke Maruyama is in one of the torpedo planes.
I told the pilot to head the plane for the bridge of the Yorktown. I pulled the lever and the bomb went down. When I turned around, I saw a big splash right next to the Yorktown. So I believed the bomb hit its target.
The Yorktown has caught fire on her stack. Crew members secure the boilers and pour water on the flames. But can the ship survive? Still under attack from the Hiryu Zeros and torpedo planes, the USS Yorktown is ablaze in flames. It's a problem for returning pilots like Ensign Robert Elder.
When we got into the vicinity of the Yorktown, then radio just came alive. They cleared us out of the pattern, stay clear, stay clear. We are under heavy attack. So we didn't argue that. Low on fuel, we headed for the Enterprise and just barely made it there.
Damage to the Yorktown is severe, and word comes down to abandon ship. Late that afternoon, American planes from the Enterprise are able to locate the Hiryu and launch an attack to take this final carrier out of action.
Picked up the Hiryu. She had aircraft in the air, and they were mad as hornets, and they swarmed all over us. But so badly outnumbered that it was only a matter of minutes before we had fatally damaged it.
Taisuke Maruyama has returned to the Hiryu and is aboard when it is hit.
Finally, the engines were losing power on the Hiryu. The fire was getting bigger and bigger, and some of us were trying to extinguish the fire, but the water pump was destroyed, so there was no water.
Admiral Yamamoto orders a general retreat. An observer submarine is called into service to sink the Yorktown, which is afloat 150 miles northeast of Midway. The crew is anxious to see battle, especially after they learn of the disastrous blow to their Navy and national pride. A damage control party volunteers to save what's left of the Yorktown. The USS Hammond stays alongside to furnish power and necessary equipment. The crew loads their guns and gets ready in case of another attack. Then they bury the dead. With the boiler fires under control, the order is given to start the engines. The plan is to limp back to Pearl Harbor, burning all the furniture on board as fuel. But the Japanese observer submarine spots the Yorktown and loads its tubes with torpedoes. It is evident that the Yorktown is doomed. At 6 a.m. on June 7th, she begins to sink. As the ship's log is officially closed, it is exactly 6 months to the hour since the attack on Pearl Harbor. Crew members of the Yorktown solemnly watch with emotion as their ship goes under. The captain of the submarine which sank the Yorktown will return to Japan and be hailed as a hero.
Number-wise, including ships and planes, Japan was stronger. But the Americans not only had ships and squadrons, they also had an air force from Midway, and the Midway Island was an unsinkable base.
The pilots who fought in the battle returned to Midway to continue their vigilance. A massive search and rescue operation is carried out for those who ran out of fuel. Many are returned, some after being missing for as long as a week. All are grateful to be alive. For every man who returns, there are many others who do not. The destruction of Midway Island testifies to the viciousness of the attack. Even the clearly identified base hospital is not off limits to the enemy. Second Lieutenant Maruyama would continue to see battle at Guadalcanal, Saipan, and Okinawa. After the war, he would go into his family's lumber business. But the war would never be far from his mind. Ensign Robert Elder would also fight at Guadalcanal, the Marshall and Solomon Islands. After returning to the United States, he would receive 2 Navy Crosses and become captain of the USS Coral Sea. Following a distinguished naval career, he would become a test pilot in carrier aviation. The human toll to secure Midway Island is high. The Americans have lost 41 planes, 80 airmen, and 1 carrier. But the Japanese have lost 332 planes, 4 carriers, and 2,155 men. This decimates Japanese naval might and turns the tide of the war in the Pacific.
In the Midway battle, I felt that after having the 4 big carriers destroyed, the war would be difficult.
It was the turning point. We went on the attack the first time since the war started. We had the upper hand, and we were on the offensive, not on the defensive.
For the first time since America entered World War II, U.S. Marines would face Japanese infantrymen on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. In the jungles, 2 powerful armies would clash in a 6-month battle that would claim nearly 30,000 lives. In 1942, Jasper Hood was a private first class with the 1st Marine Division. This is where he would meet the enemy on the battlefront. For the 5 months following Pearl Harbor, the Japanese continue their conquest of the Pacific. Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands is the latest addition. Guadalcanal is only 2,500 square miles. Most of it is dense jungle. But Japanese control would threaten Australia. With an airbase, enemy planes would bomb and disrupt Allied shipping between the United States and Australia. In July of 1942, Americans learned that engineers of the Japanese Imperial Navy had begun construction of an airstrip at the southern tip of Guadalcanal. 2,000 miles away, U.S. Marines arrive in New Zealand. One of them is a private first class in the 1st Marine Division, direct from training at Paris Island, Jasper Hood.
We bundled up and went up to Norfolk, Virginia, and shipped out and went through the Panama Canal, landed in Wellington, New Zealand.
The New Zealanders are pleased to accommodate U.S. Marines because it deters any Japanese plans of invasion. Most of them, like Jasper Hood, are fresh out of basic training with no battle experience. They begin a 6-month program before being committed to a campaign in the Pacific. Suddenly, after only 1 week, the training program is canceled. Concern about the Guadalcanal Air Base takes precedence. The 1st Marine Division is assigned to the Solomon Islands. They are to take Guadalcanal and Tulagi.
We knew we were headed for someplace, but didn't know where. That particular time, there wasn't any place else to go. You was heading them up, moving them out. That you was moving someplace that you'd rather not be moving toward, I imagine.
During the 2-week sea voyage to the Solomons, the Marines cram in whatever training they can. It is only theoretical, and they will soon be thrust into combat. Until then, there's time for a little R&R.
Nobody wanted to be there. You can bitch and moan and gripe, and if you do that, then you get up and do your job. So when you complain all the time and you can't do anything about it, all that does is make you feel worse.
Friday, August 7th, 1942. Americans shell the island of Guadalcanal to pave the way for the landing. For the first time in the Pacific War, Americans invade Japanese territory. 11,000 men will go ashore. Intelligence estimates there are 5,000 Japanese on the island. In reality, there are less than 2,000 of the enemy. Only 240 have weapons. The rest are unarmed construction workers.
In the first place, we did this early morning, and my unit landed on Tulagi, not Guadalcanal. The distance between the two, I don't think it's more than 25 miles, if that far. And it had a little bit of a harbor, not much. And the Japanese made that a headquarters base as well. See? And so that was the purpose of taking it. But that was not the main objective.
The main objective, Guadalcanal, is within reach. Marines land with almost no opposition. They are surprised because the Japanese, unprepared for the invasion, have fled from this part of the island. Jasper Hood's landing on Tulagi is uneventful as well.
Since there was no enemy on that end of the island, they were all on the other end, and so we then went up and joined the raiders, and there was sort of good skirmishes there.
The raiders are barraged by mortar and artillery, but are able to clear out caves of dug-in Japanese and secure the island.
I don't know the beliefs of the Japanese people, but they would not surrender. You had to kill them.
On the very first day ashore, Marines easily take control of the airstrip. They christen it Henderson Field, after a Marine pilot who was shot down at the Battle of Midway.
The Japanese were caught completely off guard by the U.S. Marine landing in Guadalcanal in August of 1942. Because of poor intelligence reports following the landing, the Japanese High Command believed it was simply a reconnaissance in force and that the Japanese could quickly and totally defeat them. Later on, as the Japanese finally grasped the magnitude of the Marine landing, they sent, obviously, more reinforcements, including the 35th Brigade with Major General Kawaguchi.
The Japanese plan is to strike fast before the Marines can bring in reinforcements to hold the island. Because the Japanese control the sea and the air around the Solomons, they send planes, ships, and troops from their bases. From nearby Rabaul, they send planes to bomb the American invaders.
I guess the next day, as the Japanese recovered from the landing, here came their Navy and their plane.
The night after the American invasion, Japanese warships sailed down a narrow channel between Guadalcanal and the neighboring Savo Island. This time, it's the Americans who are surprised. With the Japanese now in command of the attack, over 1,000 Americans are killed. 4 heavy cruisers are sunk. 1 destroyer is a total loss for the American Navy. This is the worst disaster since Pearl Harbor.
This was the time when we didn't control the water or the air. They came down with 2 battleships and I don't know how many cruisers and destroyers, and they just cruised up and down the coast. It went on, it sounded like 10 hours. We were laying on the side of the hill, just praying, when's it going to stop? And yeah, you're scared to death. Well, the Navy commander that was in charge of the fleet at that time, he did not wish to lose what little he had. And so he skedaddled back out of range. Well, when he left, that left the transports, which we had been on, like sitting ducks. And so they up anchored and followed. And so we got ashore with darn little supplies. And I think we pretty much were on the slaughtering block. I don't really think too many people thought that we were going to be able to hold on.
Marine engineers furiously work around the clock to finish the airfield, using captured Japanese equipment to do the job. During the day, Japanese bombs blow new holes in the field. But on August 12th, the field is finally ready. The first American plane lands on Guadalcanal. A week later, more planes follow. The newly arrived American planes keep the Japanese from landing reinforcements during the daylight hours. But when night falls, Japanese cruisers and destroyers make regular nightly runs down the channel between Guadalcanal and Savo Island. It is during these attacks that reinforcements move onto Guadalcanal. Two weeks after the American landing, the Japanese make their first move to retake Henderson Field.
The Japanese believed themselves to be invincible. They thought that the Americans, soldiers or Marines, lacked the fighting spirit that characterized Japanese troops. They also felt that the Americans were spiritually weak and that they despised hand-to-hand combat, at which the Japanese excelled. Furthermore, the Japanese loved night attacks, and they were convinced the Americans were terrified of the night. Their infantry tactics favored hand-to-hand combat and close combat. These are conditions the jungle terrain favors very much.
The attack is suicidal. Outnumbered more than 4 to 1, nearly 1,000 Japanese are cut down on the banks of the Tenarue River.
In the tropics, it takes a mighty few hours till that body is bloated and then the insects take over. And so you have to do something to try and prevent disease.
But the Japanese are already gathering their forces for yet another attack on Henderson Field. General Kawaguchi, commanding the Japanese brigade, is convinced he can take back Guadalcanal within 6 weeks.
Their great advantage, I think, at Guadalcanal was the fact that many of the Japanese troops there were combat veterans. They had combat experience in China and the Netherlands East Indies. Many of the Marines didn't. Their great advantage, I think, at Guadalcanal was the fact that they were tough, hardened combat veterans. There were many difficulties associated with jungle fighting. The most important was the way that the jungle just fragmented units. It was very difficult to bring an entire unit together to accomplish its mission because of the rugged terrain, thick jungle, swamps, rivers, whatever.
After 3 weeks on Tulagi, Marines are transported over